As the Seahawks continue to overhaul their edge rushing group, is it going to be Bowser's revenge in the Pacific Northwest? We're going to be breaking it all down here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on our Thursday episode by my co-host, Connor Benintendi. Can't even say my co-host name correct today. A special thanks to all the 12s out there, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Whether you're listening down in Phoenix, Arizona, in Cardinals country, or up in Victoria, British Columbia, we appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We are now less than 10 days away from the season opener in the NFL, Connor. The excitement building. We're going to be diving into what's next for the Seahawks as they continue to churn their 53-man roster for week one against the Denver Broncos, which quarterbacks could be on the practice squad radar, and much more, courtesy of our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Now for your lead story here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Earlier this week, Seattle made a bold move, trading for Trevis Gipson, the veteran edge rusher from the Jaguars, bringing him in as insurance for an injured Uchenna Nwosu. We don't know how many games Nwosu will miss. He may be able to play in week one. He might miss 3 or 4 games, but for now, not an injured reserve. And the Seahawks are not done flipping stones over, trying to fortify that edge rusher group. Adam Kaplan of Pro Football 365 announcing today via report that the Seahawks are expected to bring in Tyus Bowser, the former Baltimore Ravens outside linebacker. And Connor, this creates plenty of intrigue because Tyus Bowser has played his entire NFL career in Baltimore. And oh, by the way, Mike Macdonald was his linebacker coach for several years. And in the last season he played in Baltimore that actually played in any games, 2022, Macdonald's first year as the defensive coordinator for the Ravens. So there's already that connection. There's that history there. Of course, there's the injury problems as well. Bowser did not play at all last year. He missed a big chunk of the 2022 season coming off an Achilles injury. Nonetheless, he's only 29. He is going to know this defensive scheme inside and out from already playing in it previously. And there's never a such thing as too many pass rushers in today's NFL.
Yeah, I think another thing we're learning, Corbin, is that Mike Macdonald is just not shy about bringing in players that he's worked with in the past. You know, now we have multiple Michigan players on Seattle's roster that Mike Macdonald coached there. And now you've got potentially Bowser coming in to bolster this edge group. And Bowser's just really kind of flown under the radar. I personally had completely forgotten about him. I don't know about you, Corbin, but I just forgot he even existed and was on the free agent market here, especially because back-to-back pretty devastating injuries for him. But he's somebody who's been really productive in 6 NFL seasons. Obviously, he's got 4 interceptions as a 3-4 outside linebacker, which you don't see all the time, especially as somebody who's primarily a pass rusher. But I think it was something that I took from the story you wrote for Seahawks on SI too, Corbin, that he allowed a 69.0 passer rating when dropping into coverage. And that's solid. That's what you want. And we don't have Seattle doesn't have a lot of guys who I think we would have a lot of confidence in dropping into coverage at that position. Maybe Nwosu, but outside of that, that's mostly a pretty stout pass rushing group. So I think Bowser would immediately add a little bit. I would just be curious, how are they going to shake things up? Obviously, I know I would feel a little bit for Gipson if they moved him down to the practice squad or let him go or whatever might come of that, just because in his press conference, he's talking about his pregnant girlfriend's got to get out here. And it was really kind of a shakeup for his life. And that's the reality of the NFL. But I am curious to see what would happen with him if they do end up signing Bowser.
Yeah, I'm wondering about the depth standpoint here. This looks to me like a practice squad zero in, because the fact of the matter is the Cowboys and the Titans and the Colts, that's the new team that I have heard had a visit with Bowser as well. Those 3 teams already have met with him, and he's left without a contract. And this is a player, when you look at the career stats, he has not been necessarily back 19 and a half sacks in 6 seasons is a decent number. That's not something that a second round pick is expected to produce, though, in 6 years. He didn't necessarily have the sack production, but he did have 48 quarterback hits. As you mentioned, the interceptions. That is something that I outlined, as you said in my article on Seahawks on SI, when this report broke, that Tyus Bowser gives you a lot of balance at that outside linebacker position that I don't necessarily know that anybody else in Seattle's roster, aside from Uchenna is going to give you. I mean, Derek Hall looks like he's more comfortable now dropping into coverage when he's asked to do that. Draymond Jones, that's not going to be something you're going to be asking him to do very often, with him being a bigger bodied end. Boye Mafe is athletic enough, but he still looks like he's kind of uncomfortable doing that. He's better just flying forward. So this group in general, I mean, Gipson, his coverage numbers aren't great. This would be a different style Sam linebacker that's more of a rush coverage oriented linebacker. And certainly he would know the scheme inside and out. But I do look at this as being a practice squad situation, because Seattle only has 15 players signed to the practice squad right now. And Tyreek Smith, who was reported yesterday to be coming back to Seattle, here's the thing about practice squad signings. Those can look like they're going to happen and then they can fall through, or there could be a better opportunity. Maybe Tyreek Smith now is thinking, I got a chance to get in a 53-man roster somewhere else, so I'm not going to sign yet with Seattle's practice squad. So you've still got 2 openings on this practice squad to bring in somebody. They didn't bring back Nelson Caesar. There really isn't an edge in that group. So I think one of these 2 positions, one of these 2 spots that's open for Seattle is going to be an edge rusher. Could it be Tyus Bowser? That may not be what he's looking for, but look, you haven't played for more than a year. The Seahawks are going to have to get you ramped up. Even though he's healthy now, you're going to have to get him ramped up. It's kind of like Bruce Irvin a few years ago when he re-signed in the middle of the season. You can't just throw a guy into a game when he hasn't had training camp and stuff. They would need to ramp him up, but this gives you one hell of an insurance policy if, say, Uchenna misses more time than expected, or somebody else, God forbid, gets banged up here in the next few weeks, that you can turn and you can call up Tyus Bowser and he can check right in. He's going to know the scheme. So I think that's what this is all about. I don't think Seattle's looking to add him to the 53 right now. Maybe they'll prove me wrong, because he does have that connection with Mike Macdonald, but this does feel like something where they need to get him onto the practice field, see where he fits in coming off these injuries, and then they can address later in the season, is this somebody that we want in the 53 that we think can make a difference for us in the regular season?
Yeah, and it is curious because, like you said, Corbin, expecting one of those 2 spots left on Seattle's practice squad to be an edge rusher. I think that would be a really great insurance policy, and you would feel really good about the depth that Seattle has at the edge spot. But obviously, I know we're going to talk about this later in the show, but it is just, I am very curious to see how they address these last 2 spots, because obviously Artie Burns is expected to move up to the 53 before week 1, and then you don't really have the slot corner depth, and we also don't have a third quarterback on the roster or on the practice squad and roster right now. But overall, I would just like to see what Bowser can do when it come back. You know, as somebody who was previously productive and has had that has that hybrid skill set, which, like you said, we don't really have right now on the roster. I think it would be a great add, and at the very least, you bring him in, you work him out as they are reportedly. If you sign him and it doesn't work out, there you go. You just cleared up another spot. You can fill that with a slot corner, quarterback, whatever you want to do, any other position. But the practice squad is obviously exactly what it sounds like. It's the practice squad. Bring him in, give him a shot, see if he's able to come back from those injuries. And if he does, great. You may have found a diamond in the rough.
Yeah, this is all hedging on how the visit and the workout goes, because I don't know all the specific details, but I know that Bowser's time in Baltimore did not end on good terms. So who knows how much Mike Macdonald, if any, has anything to do with that. But the fact that the Seahawks are getting him in for a visit suggests that Mike Macdonald is interested in kicking the tires there. John Schneider's interested in doing that. So at worst, you're bringing in a guy on the practice squad that is experienced. That's the nice thing about the new practice squad rules that were put in place a few years ago. Now you can have established veterans that have played in almost 90 games in the NFL, like Tyus Bowser has, and have been a productive player in a number of different ways. It does give you really good depth and insurance for when those injuries inevitably are going to happen. So I do think there's a chance, if this meeting goes well, if he works out well, that the Seahawks could have him on the practice squad in one of these 2 openings that are still left. And then we could eventually see him suiting up for the Seahawks. We're going to get back. We're going to talk third quarterback options for the Seattle Seahawks That'll be coming up next here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Want to get in shape but having trouble staying motivated? Make 5-Hour Energy shots part of your lifestyle and get the energy boost you need to get fit. We all know you sometimes do not want to go to the gym. Take a 5-Hour Energy shot to give you the feeling and alertness so you can get to the gym. 5-Hour Energy is the brand hardworking people like you have trusted for over 20 years to give them the alert, energized feeling they need to get through a busy, hectic day. You always know where your 5-Hour Energy shots are, right at the cash register at nearly every convenience, drug, and grocery store nationwide. Stock up on money-saving multi-packs to make sure you never run out of delicious, energizing 5-Hour Energy shots. If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that is the number 5, hourenergy.com, and get some 5-Hour Energy products today. You can use the promo code LOCKEDONFB to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order. It cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. Welcome back to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by Connor Benintendi on this fine sunny afternoon that the power decided to go out in the middle of our show. That, I guess, is what happens. Sometimes life happens. We're going to talk quarterbacks now. And it's interesting, Connor, because we got to watch PJ Walker throughout training camp preseason, coming in as the established veteran that he is. And Walker looked better than Sam Howell at times early in training camp, but eventually talent started to take over. Once Sam Howell got much more comfortable with Ryan Grubb's scheme, he started to play better, had some really good performances in the preseason. We unfortunately did not get to see that from PJ Walker, and that's why he was not one of the 15 players immediately signed to Seattle's practice squad. I get the feeling that John Schneider is out there looking very closely at some of the other quarterbacks that have hit the market here, even in the last 24 hours, in the second tier of waiver cuts across the NFL.
Yeah, and PJ, the thing that I noted on PJ particularly during the preseason was it just didn't seem like he was fully grasping the scheme very well. It seemed like things were developing a little bit slow for him. The third preseason game looked quite a bit better, I would say, but especially in those first two games, Corbin, it just seemed like he wasn't taking a lot of the easy outlets that Ryan Grubb has schemed, sort of baked into that scheme. He was just holding onto the ball for a while, which, was making things not be on time. He wasn't getting the ball out quickly, so on and so forth. And obviously they opted not to bring him back on the practice squad or 53-man roster. And I did talk about Tyler Huntley while your power went completely down, but I am curious, obviously, to hear what you think on Huntley, Corbin. I was just noting that he's the hottest commodity probably out there right now in terms of quarterbacks who could be a legitimate second quarterback for a team that needs him. So he might be pretty difficult to stash on the practice squad. And then obviously Ritter, the last thing I was saying right before you pop back in is the 14-12 touchdown interception ratio for Ritter doesn't really tell the whole story in a negative way, because I think Ritter is even worse than that 14-12 touchdown interception ratio sort of illustrates. But overall, I would prefer Huntley. If I had to tier kind of the three guys that they're probably really looking at right now, or four guys, I'm sorry, with Tyler Huntley, Desmond Ritter, Jaron Hall, and PJ Walker, I would probably put Huntley at the top, PJ second, then Jaron, and then Ritter. That would be my 1 through 4 sort of ordering there.
I will admit, before he signed with the Buccaneers yesterday, Michael Pratt, the rookie out of Tulane, was the quarterback that I really thought the Seahawks were going to take a very close look at. And I would not be surprised if John Schneider and his front office were trying to get Michael Pratt to come out to Seattle, because this is a kid that they had a meeting with at the Combine earlier in the pre-draft process. He's got some athleticism, a really smart kid, enough arm talent to throw the football where you need him to. With NFL concepts, I thought Michael Pratt might be a name that would make some sense. But right now, with him on the Buccaneers practice squad, the only way you're going to get him is if you're able to sign him to your roster. And I just don't get the idea that the Seahawks want to have 3 quarterbacks on their 53-man roster right now. They're fine with Geno Smith and Sam Howell. They want to use that extra roster spot to help out at another position, especially with some of the injuries they're dealing with, like Uchenna Nwosu, Abraham Lucas, some of the pieces that are going to be missing potentially early in the season for them. So that leaves you with these other quarterbacks, as you just mentioned here. To me, the safest one is PJ Walker, just because he knows your offense already. He has been running Ryan Grubb's offense. He has started games in the NFL. But when you're talking about a third quarterback, I don't necessarily think that going the safe route is usually the best route. I think you got to get a guy that you can develop, especially with some of the uncertainty beyond this year that the Seahawks may have at the quarterback position. So why not take a look at a player like Jaren Hall, who has had his moments? And I'm going to admit I was not a huge fan of Jaren Hall coming out of BYU. There were too many mistakes. There were too many decision-making gaffes that this kid made on film for my liking, and that has continued into the NFL for him. He's got some physical tools, though, so that's a guy that is worth considering. And then you look at the other two quarterbacks. Desmond Ridder, I was extremely high on. In fact, I thought the Seahawks might take him in the first round. What I have been stunned with, and I think this is what it really boils down to, Connor, if you as a quarterback do not end up in the right situation with the right coaching staff, with the right pieces around you, it's going to derail your career. We have seen that with so many different quarterbacks. And Desmond Ridder's also made some uncharacteristic mistakes with the football in terms of decision-making. That is not something that was a major red flag to me on his Cincinnati film. There were some questions about arm strength, but he was accurate. He was a great leader of his team. He didn't make those boneheaded decisions. That has not been the case in the NFL. So I don't know how much of that has to do with the coaching or the lack of that he's had to this point. I'm still intrigued by the idea of a guy that has started some games in the NFL like Desmond Ridder that I think has a higher ceiling than PJ Walker by a pretty wide margin. I'm still intrigued by that, but I would go with you that Huntley is the player of this group that I think would be the most intriguing fit, because now he has the most bogus Pro Bowl on his resume of any player I've ever seen. Like, I think 16 quarterbacks got hurt or dropped out of the Pro Bowl a few years ago. So he got to be a Pro Bowler when he'd only played in a handful of games. But Tyler Huntley has talent. This is a really athletic guy that can create with his legs. He's got plenty of arm talent. And Seattle fans got to see that in this last preseason game. He gunned a couple deep balls downfield and threw them with proficiency right on the money. There's enough good film to suggest that this kid could be a really nice emergency starter. He already has done that in Baltimore, and he's still young enough that maybe you can develop him into something more than that. So that would be the player, if I'm John Schneider, of these four, that I would be trying the hardest to try to get in the practice squad. And then I would probably have PJ Walker at number 2, Desmond Ridder number 3. Jaren Hall would be a distant number 4. If that's the best option you can do, I still think there's a lot to develop there. But I would go safety and PJ Walker over those other two guys. Huntley would be the one outside QB that I think would make a lot of sense here.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I think if it comes down to Jaren Hall, and I'm not like a huge Jaren Hall hater. I don't see a ton of upside there. I think if it came down to that, I would be more comfortable just bringing PJ Walker back unless he ends up finding another home, which is possible because he's also a player who has played obviously a lot of NFL games and has legitimate production in the NFL. But one last thing on Ridder is I was certainly in the camp of last season thinking, okay, what would this guy look like in a different situation, right? Because that Falcons offense was just a mess, and it has been, particularly when Arthur Smith was the one leading it. Everybody knows about how Bijan Robinson was utilized or not utilized, I should say, in a certain way. And for fantasy owners, particularly me, that was quite frustrating. And I probably won't be – I might actually pick up Bijan Robinson again now. But all that aside, the fact that Desmond Ridder – then went into a legitimate backup quarterback competition this offseason and didn't stay on the Arizona Cardinals roster. That's a little bit concerning to me just because you had a second chance. If you have legitimate starting upside in this league, I would hope that you could at least latch on as a second, or if they wanted to keep you around as a third quarterback, that you would have enough upside there that they would want to do that. So that's a little bit concerning for me just from the Ridder perspective. I think when it comes down to it, you're probably going to see PJ Walker back. That's my prediction. But who knows? Maybe somebody pops open over the next couple of days again, and then we're having this whole conversation over again, wondering if they're a prospect to end up on the practice squad.
That's the thing, as we've already noticed here. I mean, Huntley got released yesterday and Jaron Hall got released yesterday by their respective teams. And that was the second day after roster cuts. So these rosters are going to continue to churn. There are teams that have 3-4 quarterbacks on the roster. I mean, the Browns had 4. They couldn't keep Huntley at that point. And so I'm assuming they're going to try to get him back on their own practice squad. But, the Seahawks could maybe make an overture and say, hey, look beyond this year. There could be an opportunity for you here. So who knows what that pitch looks like, but certainly Huntley is a player that I think of this group would have the most upside, but I'm with you. I think PJ Walker is probably the safest bet as far as who's going to be back, just because he knows the offense and he's been here for the last month and a half. When we come back, we're going to continue looking at Seattle's 53-man roster, as John Schneider hinted multiple times yesterday, speaking with the media. This roster is going to look a little bit different when we get to next Tuesday, which is, as he termed it, the real cut down day, the final 53-man roster leading up to week 1. What moves do we anticipate are going to be coming in the roster upcoming days? We're going to be breaking it all down coming up next here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Game Time. You shouldn't have to think about skipping a car payment when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and with their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. If you want to see the Seahawks against the Broncos in their home opener coming up on September 8th at Lumen Field, you can get seats in the lower bowl right now for under $150. Great seats without breaking the budget to see some exciting young talent as the Seahawks try to get off to a fast start and get back to the postseason. Game Time has deals on tickets right at the day of the event, and with the Game Time guarantee, you'll always get the best price to write your own memories. If you find tickets in the same section or row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download a Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Welcome back to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by my co-host for today's show, Connor Benintendi. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s that are listening in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it, especially the days where we lose 2 or 3 minutes in the middle of a show because one of our power goes out in the house. Anyway, I digress. The Seahawks have their 53-man roster, at least the initial one, set up. And crazy enough, we're 48 hours now into this, Connor, and there still has not been a move made by the Seahawks to shake things up there. They haven't changed anything on their 53-man roster, but if you were listening to John Schneider yesterday, that is not going to remain the case. There's going to be plenty of changes that are going to be coming up here in coming days as Seattle tries to solidify that final roster for week 1 against the Denver Broncos. And I think you and I would both be in agreement, especially since you just wrote an article about this, that the Seahawks currently have 11 offensive linemen on their 53-man roster. I find it very hard to believe that they're going to have that many on the roster when they're playing the Broncos in week 1.
Yeah, and first of all, we need to see what Connor Williams' health is looking like, because if he's tracking to start in week 1, that immediately changes things where I think you have Jalen Sundell drop down to the practice squad at minimum, right? I think that's another one, and obviously you're going to have Artie Burns probably moving up. So I think offensive line and corner are probably the 2 position groups that are most in flux at this point. And who knows? I mean, maybe Seattle ends up running with George Halani on the active roster when week 1 rolls around. Maybe they want to keep four running backs available, especially if they want to put him on special teams. There's a lot of things that will change, and I think offensive line is the one that is going to be the most change before week 1, just because you've got Mike Jarrell, Sotero Lamea, and Jalen Sundell, who are all probably not going to be carried on the active roster throughout the whole season. So I am curious to see just how they're going to shake things up a little bit. Obviously, you're going to have Artie Burns, like I said, moving up, and then it'll be curious to see who moves up and down. So there's a lot of change that is still yet to come. The whole point is we don't need 11 offensive linemen on game day, I think is what it comes down to. So
Yeah, and it's interesting the way that Schneider was talking about this yesterday, and I fully agree with him. It's so hard to get offensive linemen. There is a scarcity on the offensive line that you're not going to see at other position groups. So you weren't going to risk losing an athletic player like Mike Jarrell or somebody like Satawa Lamea, who you think has a chance to be a starter at some point down the line. You weren't going to risk losing them. If you wait until 4 or 5 days after initial cuts, obviously, anytime you put a guy in the waiver wire, it's a risk. But other teams by that point have gone through a bunch of their roster shuffling, and they're trying to keep it 53 players. The chances of you being able to slip guys through goes up tremendously if you wait 4 or 5 days into the process. So I'm expecting here in the next day or two that we're going to see the Seahawks cut at least 1 or 2 of these linemen and try to get them back on the practice squad. And then I could see them elevating. Maybe it's Artie Burns. Maybe it's George Halani. Maybe they end up signing Tyus Bowser right to the 53-man roster. I mean, we don't know everything that's going to happen. But what I would say is, one, you've got to get it down to probably 9 linemen that are active. Now, Connor Williams is banged up. That changes things. If you don't think he's going to play in week 1, you might have to carry 10 in this game. So that's a big wrench here that's going to determine what's going to happen for week 1. But I also look at the fact that Seattle only has 5 corners on the roster right now. Now, they could easily just have Artie Burns be a game day call-up. That's what they did last year, and then sign him to the roster after week 1 because then his salary is not guaranteed. That is a mechanism that John Schneider has used quite a bit during his tenure. But they've got 5 corners that are going to be active. Rayshon Jenkins may not be able to play in this game either. John Schneider was not committal to him being able to play in week 1. So somebody like Ty Okada or Marquise Blair could very easily be on this roster, or at least be a game day elevation. You're allowed up to 2 of those every week. So those are the position groups right now that I think are going to be the most interesting to watch in coming days, because I don't see any way the Seahawks are keeping 11 offensive linemen. And I find it hard to believe, Connor, that they are going to roll forward with 5 corners, especially when right now you don't have DJ James on the practice squad or the active roster. Who else is going to play slot corner for you? I mean, I guess Kobe Bryant could go back there. He's played that position before, but right now it's Devin Witherspoon, and then everybody else is really a boundary corner on that depth chart. So Artie Burns, that's the big reason we're expecting he's going to be moved up, or he's going to get onto the roster outright early in the season. But I think those are the 2 position groups right now that you've got the most volatile situation in terms of what you're going to be seeing change-wise on this roster.
Yeah, I was going to note also the Kobe Bryant situation, that they could slot him in if they need to. Obviously, he's played that position in his rookie year a couple years ago, and that's a backup option, but I don't think they want to do that. I think they want to have Artie Burns healthy and ready to go. And one of the other things, Corbin, is they have to make a decision on Uchenna Nwosu as well, and that's something that they were trying to clearly buy time with by keeping him on the 53-man roster at final cutdowns and not wanting to designate him as a short-term IR player. But it's still possible that Uchenna Nwosu ends up on IR, and if he does, he's going to have to miss those 4 games, and that is what it is. But I think a lot of people are obviously reading it as maybe he's only going to miss a game or 2 since they didn't designate him. And honestly, I'm reading it more as they just don't know what to do yet. And so that's something that's going to have to be made, a decision that's going to have to be made prior to week 1. And that shakes another thing up, because then you might have another roster spot. So there's just so much we don't know yet, and so many conversations that are probably happening in-house right now of literally just trying to put a puzzle together of, okay, we need to get this to this, and how many do we need to carry on game day? We don't need 11 offensive linemen, but we need at least 9, things like that. Who's going to play, who's not? So there's a lot that's probably going to come out in the next few days, or over the next week, I should say. I think they have to make those decisions by, what is it, like Tuesday or Wednesday of next week? You'd probably know a little bit better than me, Corbin.
Next Tuesday is the day they've got to have all those decisions made.
Yeah, so they're going to have, they've got some time, right? They have the weekend and things like that, but in practices, if there's any new injury developments in practices, this is football, those things happen. I think it was Artie Burns came back to practice, I think it was yesterday, and immediately re-aggravated his toe. So you just never know with these things. Some of them are going to be last-second decisions because that's the reality of the NFL, right?
Yeah, that is the reality of the NFL, and you've got to be ready for all those things to come your way. But the one thing that I will say, and I mentioned this on yesterday's show, Uchenna Nwosu, the Seahawks can place him on injured reserve until September 7th, and he's still going to be missing the first 4 games. So they've got a wider window to make a decision on that. But you would think that the insurance policy on practice squad, whether that's Tyreke Smith, whether that ends up being Tyus Bowser or another player, you would think that the Seahawks are going to be making that move sooner rather than later. But there's going to be some practice squad musical chairs going on here, because if you cut Mike Jarrell and or Satawa Lamea, or if they cut another offensive lineman like a Jalen Sundell, Seattle's going to want to get those guys back on the practice squad if they clear waivers, which means you need to open up practice squad spots. Now, you could just make simple switches. A couple of guys get elevated. Now you have 2 openings. Okay, we can sign these guys. But it isn't always that simple. If they want to bring in somebody like Tyus Bowser right onto the 53, then now you've only got 1 spot. Now you got to jettison somebody from your practice squad so that you can sign both those offensive linemen. So that's what's crazy about this time of year, and it's always fluctuating. These rosters are never set in stone, particularly the practice squad. You will see a lot of shuffling throughout the season, and that's going to be continuing right now. So that's maybe the most fascinating part of this, is seeing, what's Seattle going to do at quarterback, as we just talked about. I would think they would want to have a third QB on the practice squad as an insurance policy that can also run scout team, which is why somebody like a Huntley that is a really athletic player, you can get prepared better to face dual threat quarterbacks when you get a guy like that can run the scout team offense. But I would think that's going to be a priority. And then I would think doing some reallocating of your positional resources. You kept your offensive linemen safe so that they didn't get plucked off of waivers. You're hoping you can sneak them through now, with other teams being less likely to put in claims because they're trying to finalize their rosters as well. And they can't get above 53. They have to let somebody go. You're hoping that you can make that work for you. But I would say, as far as predictions go, it's going to be less than 11 offensive linemen. I think there's going to be more corners on this roster, maybe another edge added as well. The QB position, buckle up. It's going to be a lot of fun, because there's going to be plenty of moves before we get to next week and eventually the season opener for the Seahawks against the Denver Broncos. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Connor at John Benintendi. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back tomorrow, as we do each and every year, Blue Friday, it is season prediction time with Nick Lee. We're going to have a lot of fun looking at what we think from a team and individual standpoint for the 2024 Seahawks heading towards week 1. You won't want to miss it. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and thanks for listening in. Go Hawks.